Welcome back. So today we're looking at a commentary track that digs into celebrity activism, specifically Billie Eilish and Phineas, and their reactions to ICE and the Alex Pretty show. Let's just jump right in.
Let's do it.
Okay, so a big theme here is this tension, right, between celebrity vanity and the actual political message they're trying to send. But the first, I think, major point for improvement is how the material's central argument about superficiality is, well, it's ironically undermined by using really superficial ad hominem insults.
That's the core friction, absolutely. The narrator's trying to take down this whole performative thing, like calling out Billie Eilish for posting a selfie with a caption about a tragedy, but then they just undercut their own intellectual high ground by attacking how people look.
Yeah.
The moment that really stood out to me was when the narrator calls that comedian on TikTok really, really ugly.
But is that a fatal flaw? This is a commentary track. It's meant to be a bit raw. Doesn't pointing that out kind of, paint the scene for someone who's just listening? Or does that just cross a line?
I think it crosses a line, and not just like a moral line, but a functional one. The second you bring ugly into a cultural critique, you're telling your audience that you're operating on the level of a playground bully. It just creates this jarring tonal shift. We go from this interesting analysis of virtue signaling to what just feels like petty spite. And the risk is alienation. If I'm a listener who's kind of on the fence, hearing that just makes me think, this isn't a serious critique. It sounds like the narrator just wants to be mean.
Being mean versus being right? I see that. Okay, so if the goal is to show disdain, which it clearly is, how do they do that without making the whole argument feel cheap?
Well, the fix is pretty straightforward, but it takes some discipline. Instead of commenting on the comedian's appearance, just focus on their argument. If their point was dumb, take the point apart. If they were supposedly censored, talk about what that means. The second you mention their looks, you're basically admitting looks are relevant to the debate, which is exactly what the narrator's accusing the celebrities of doing.
That's a very fair point. And speaking of appearance, there's that other phrase, the narrator mocks Billie Eilish for her looks-maxing face. That one jumped out at me. What exactly are we talking about?
Good catch. Yeah, looks-maxing is a term that comes from some pretty specific corners of the internet. We're talking incel forums, the manosphere. It's this whole idea of trying to maximize your physical attractiveness.
So by using that phrase, the narrator's doing more than just describing a face.
Oh, way more. They're signaling a very specific cultural affiliation. Or at least that they consume that kind of media. For most people, it just sounds like weird slang. But the weakness is that it's still just mocking the face itself, not the action.
So how do we sharpen that critique? If the point is that she's posing, how do you say that without falling into that kind of niche, slangy trap?
You focus on the cognitive dissonance. It's a perfect chance to analyze the juxtaposition. The critique shouldn't be, she looks silly making that face. It should be, look at the level of narcissism it takes to pair a vanity selfie with a caption about systemic injustice. That frames it as a failure of tone and priorities, not just, I don't like how she looks. It turns an insult into, a sociological observation.
Right. There's another bit of this us versus them thing with the Brit who commented on Americans waiting for celebrities to speak. The narrator kind of dismisses them as a euro. Is that just persona, or is it a structural issue?
I think it creates a structural problem, because it just shuts down a really interesting conversation. The narrator says, I am not going to hear it from any euros. It's just a door slam. But what if that comment actually buried a really useful point?
How so?
Well, a stronger way goal would be to actually acknowledge the cultural difference. The narrator could have said, the British commentator actually highlights a uniquely American problem, our brand of celebrity worship. By validating the observation instead of attacking the person's nationality, you actually reinforce your own point.
You turn an attack into supporting evidence. Okay, let's move on to structure. I think the issue here is what we sometimes call the Russian doll effect, right? A lack of thematic discipline.
That's the one. Yeah, you open a doll that's labeled celebrity activism, but inside that is one labeled gun control. And inside that is another one on specific firearm mechanics. The piece starts as a critique of Instagram posts, but then just falls down this super deep rabbit hole on the Second Amendment.
I noticed that. We get really into the weeds on Phineas's comments. But I have to play devil's advocate for a sec. Phineas made specific claims about guns, SIG 320s, extra mags. If he's wrong, doesn't the narrator have to correct him? Aren't you letting misinformation slide if you cut that?
That is the temptation. It's a strong one, I get it. But we have to look at the purpose of the episode. The listener tuned in for a critique of performative activism. Suddenly, they're getting a lecture on the difference between impeding arrest and resisting arrest.
Right.
It just dilutes the focus. It makes the narrator sound less like a cultural critic and more like they're just trying to win some argument they're having on Twitter.
So it's about audience expectation.
It is. The technical stuff is a detour. You can correct the record, but you can't let it hijack the whole narrative.
Okay, so let's take that specific part where Phineas argues children have to die so we can carry weapons. How do you fix that without just cutting the rebuttal completely?
You have to bracket it. You bracket the technical debate so it serves the bigger theme. So unless the whole episode is about gun safety, you just summarize those details to give context for the celebrity's mistake.
What does that actually sound like?
So instead of a 3-minute debate on the SIG 320, the narrator should stick to the lens of credibility. The argument isn't Phineas is wrong because the gun doesn't work that way. It's, does a pop star living in a gated community really have the expertise to lecture anyone on concealed carry policy?
I see.
His technical errors just prove that he's repeating talking points, not speaking from experience.
So you attack his authority, not the gun's specs. That keeps the focus on celebrity hubris, which is the main theme.
Exactly. It keeps it tight, and you don't lose the listeners who couldn't care less about gun specs.
I also felt the part about the George Floydification of the incident and the whole Trump versus Obama immigration policy thing started to drift. The narrator goes into this whole history lesson.
It did. It's detailed, sure, but it's a speed bump. That whole section just needs to be condensed to serve one purpose, showing why the celebrity takes are so shallow. You don't need a full lecture. You just need to show that they're working with bad information.
So more like, they're criticizing policy A, but they don't seem to realize we're actually living under policy B.
That's it. It's a quick correction that doesn't kill the pacing. Speaking of heavy concepts, let's talk about the use of evolutionary psychology in this.
Ah, you're talking about the Dunbar number section.
Yes. This part was fascinating, but it also felt a little underdeveloped. The narrator brings up the Dunbar number, this idea that we can only really care about, 150 people, and then uses that to call global empathy hubris and unbelievably narcissistic.
It's a huge claim. Basically, you're a narcissist for even trying to care about people outside your village.
It is. And the weakness is that it's used like a blunt instrument to call the desire to care narcissistic. I mean, it feels more like a justification for apathy than a real critique. It just dismisses the intent of the activist entirely.
But isn't there some truth to it? I mean, we can't care about everyone. We all get burned out.
We do get burned out. But that's the key question, isn't it? Is the burnout because we're arrogant? Or is it because the tools we're using, social media, are broken?
Ah, so it's a structural critique again.
Exactly. We suggest reframing it. Focus on media saturation, not biological limit. Dunbar's number applies to a village, but the internet exposes us to the tragedies of millions, and our brains just short circuit.
So the argument shouldn't be, you're arrogant for trying to care. It should be, social media falsely simulates intimacy, and that leads to burnout.
That's a much more powerful shift. Instead of saying it's nonsensical to care, the narrator could argue that platforms like Instagram actually gamify empathy. They turn it into social currency.
Right.
The critique is then about the medium, not our biology. It's not that we can't care. It's that the platform forces us to perform care in a way that's totally unsustainable.
I like that a lot more. It's less misanthropic. There's also that bit about the friend posting old Hillary and Bernie clips. The narrator just dismisses it as futile.
And that's another missed opportunity. Instead of just calling it useless, analyze it as a failure of digital communication. The friend is trying to use archival footage to fight an emotional fire on a platform built for instant gratification. It's people talking past each other. That's a critique of the internet, not the friend.
It's so much more robust. Okay, let's spend a bit of time on this last big area, evidence and generalization. This is where I think the script could really be elevated.
Just so hyperbolic. Gen Z has a pathology.
It is, and that kind of language just weakens the whole piece. When you say something like that, you're painting with such a broad brush, and it's so easy for a listener to think, well, I know Gen Z people who aren't like that. And boom, they've dismissed your entire point.
So this is where we need to use the steelman technique.
Exactly. Address the strongest version of the other side. Instead of saying Gen Z has a pathology, frame it as a pressure from the platforms. Gen Z isn't pathological. They're the first generation raised in a digital world where silence gets equated with violence. That's a much more empathetic and, I think, accurate framing.
That makes a lot of sense. But what about the 0 views claim on the TikTok video? The narrator is so sure it must have been suppressed.
That part felt a bit conspiratorial, didn't it? It had 0 views, so it must be suppression. I mean, we have to ask, could the evidence point to something else?
Like a glitch? Or just a display error?
or the algorithm just hadn't picked it up yet. By jumping straight to suppression, the narrator just sounds a little paranoid. The fix is to acknowledge the alternative. Say something like, now, this could be a glitch, but when you see it alongside the Gracie Abrams example, a pattern starts to emerge.
Right.
That's a much stronger argument. You're building a case, not just relying on one weird anecdote.
Speaking of patterns, this brings us to what I think is the most underused piece of evidence in the whole script. The narrator mentions Katy Perry, Zoe Deutsch, and Natalie Portman all posting identical scripts.
Yes, this is what was so frustrating. This is the smoking gun. The narrator has actual concrete evidence of coordinated messaging, and it's just treated as a throwaway line to mock the actresses.
So how should they have handled it?
That should have been the centerpiece. Don't just say, look what they did. You say, this is how PR firms manufacture consent in Hollywood. Explain the mechanism. These aren't individual thoughts. This is a press release sent out to clients.
Wow. Yeah, that changes the entire stakes of the episode.
It absolutely does. It moves the critique from these women are fake to this industry is a machine. It becomes a systemic critique. If you can prove that 5 A-listers use the exact same words within an hour of each other, you don't need to call them ugly or narcissists. The facts do all the work for you.
It anchors the whole thing in reality. I think the common thread in all these suggestions is moving from the personal to the structural.
That is the perfect summary. Ad hominem attacks are personal, cultural analysis is structural. Gun specs are technical, credibility is structural. Biological limits, they're personal. Media saturation is structural. Every time the narrator gets bogged down in the specific person, the argument gets weaker. Every time they pull back to look at the system, the PR firms, the algorithms, the argument sings.
Love that. The arguments sing. It really does. Because when you strip away the anger, there's a really sharp critique of modern culture in it. It's just buried under, ugly comedians and SIG 320.
And that's the hard part of editing, right? It's killing your darlings. You might think the ugly joke is funny or be proud of your gun knowledge, but if it doesn't serve the central thesis, it has to go. The listener is smart. They want the insight, not the cheap shots.
Exactly. They need to be told how the machine makes celebrities so annoying, not just that they are annoying.
The why is always more interesting than the what.
To recap then, we have 4 main actionable takeaways. First, strip away the ad hominem attacks. Calling people ugly or mocking faces just hurts your own credibility.
Second, maintain that structural discipline. Don't let the Russian doll thing happen. If you're critiquing celebrity culture, stay on celebrity culture. Bracket the technical deep dives to keep the narrative focused.
Third, handle those big sociological claims with care. Don't use something like the Dunbar number to just dismiss empathy. Reframe the argument around media saturation and the way these platforms work. It's a much stronger critique.
And finally, avoid the hyperbolic generalizations. Those claims about zero views or Gen Z pathology are weak. Use the Steelman technique. Build your case with real patterns, like that PR firm coordination, instead of just using broad strokes.
This was a submission with a lot of passion. With just a few of these edits, it could be a really biting piece of cultural criticism. We'd love to see a revised version. Apply these changes, cut the insults, trim the gun talk, refine the arguments, and really lean into that PR evidence and send it back to us. We'd love to see the new draft.
I'd be very interested to see how that turns out.
That does it for this critique. Keep writing, keep refining, and we'll see you next time.